and Max Blumenthal, our friend, joins us. Welcome back, Max.
Good to see you, Nima. How are you?
Please subscribe and hit like button and follow Max on the Gray News. And you can follow him on YouTube. You can follow him on his website, the Gray Zone News. You may find a lot of stuff there, and a lot of information. And so, Max, let me start with the case of Charlie Kirk. I haven't talked about it since last time we talked. And what are we going to ever find out what has happened to Charlie Kirk? Because it seems that he's fading away from the news, and just Candace Owen is talking about him, no one else.
Well, there's going to be a trial of Tyler Robinson, the alleged shooter. The trial so far, the judge has banned all filming and taping of the proceedings. And actually, there's now a petition by friends and supporters of Charlie Kirk to allow taping from inside the courtroom. I'm not sure what they think will come out of that, but TPUSA is officially supporting that. And additionally, there was a story in the New York Times yesterday which suggests that those who are trying to learn more about the FBI investigation and whether there was a second shooter, whether there was any foreign connection, whether there was anything to be suspicious about, and whether there was any angle outside of the official story, which is that a disturbed young man who was angered by Charlie Kirk's anti-trans rhetoric shot him for political reasons, should be shamed. This article homed in on the director of counterintelligence in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. His name is Joe Kent. He works directly under Tulsi Gabbard. And the article was obviously inspired by leaks and comments on background from the FBI, which was angry that Joe Kent had begun prying into the FBI's investigation, obviously on behalf of elements in the White House and within America First, the America First movement, who do not trust the official story and don't trust the FBI investigation and don't trust Kash Patel, who fumbled badly during the first 72 hours of the investigation and was responsible for various embarrassing displays about seeing Charlie Kirk in Valhalla. So Joe Kent was shamed in this article, painted as a crazed conspiracy theorist for simply seeking to vet the FBI's investigation from within a civilian position. And I think that's the kind of accountability that people who supported Donald Trump and supported Charlie Kirk probably want, but it threatens to unravel an official story which has been weaponized by the Trump administration and the broader conservative movement to further erode free speech in the US, to strip people of their visas for making tasteless comments about Charlie Kirk, for putting people in prison. There's actually a man who's been in prison for comments he made about Charlie Kirk online, and for generally ramping up the security state and enacting some kind of FBI COINTELPRO style operation against the left on the bogus grounds that Tyler Robinson was actually a member of the left, when if he was the lone shooter, was clearly a nihilist who was acting outside of any political movement's parameters.
Yeah. Max, there is another, some sort of turmoil going on in the United States in considering Zohran Mamdani in New York. It seems that he's going to win and he's going to be the next mayor of New York. And there is a lot of hate.
Sorry, Nima, before you finish this question, I forgot. I wanted to make one point about Charlie Kirk, and then we can come back to this question. What we need to know is what happened to Charlie Kirk's body. Where is Charlie Kirk's body? And was there an autopsy? What do we know about the autopsy? What do we know about the ballistics report? Where's the body buried? Is it buried? I mean, what's going on there? Because that's what we've heard nothing about. And I think it's the data that everybody deserves that could put all of the supposed conspiracy theories to rest. So I just wanted to put that point out there before we move.
Yeah, great. Yeah, good point. And Zohran Mamdani, coming to him, and the Democratic Party has decided not to support him. And then later on, they have found that he's gonna win. Then let's support him. Let's. What is the case of Zohran Mamdani? What sort of the threat is he? Because they see him as a threat. You look at on X everywhere. MAGA, Republicans all hate him. What
Yeah.
is that? What is that he's trying to make it, that he resonates, his sort of argument resonates more than the Republican, than Democrat? What is that?
Well, Zohran Mamdani represents a larger trend within big city American politics, but especially a city like New York, that's a magnet for young people from around the country who want to be in a cultural and financial center and who see Palestine as sort of the moral test of our time. And so you have this whole new class all across the major boroughs of New York, along with many native New Yorkers who are rejecting the Zionist politics of the past, which have dominated New York politics for generations. I mean, you can look at every New York mayor of my lifetime. None of them were allowed to part from the pro-Israel line, and each one competed with one another to be more pro-Israel than the last. They were complete fanatics. And anyone in New York politics, I'm thinking about someone many viewers might not have heard of, Charles Barron, who was a New York state senator and city council member who represented under many poor Black New Yorkers and did a very good job of representing them as they were being pushed out of the city because they're priced out. He was an anti-imperialist, opponent of apartheid from South Africa to Israel. And the New York establishment did everything they could to drive him out and destroy him and make an example of him. New York's also the most Jewish city in America. I mean, it has the most Jewish residents outside of any city other than Tel Aviv. So, any city outside of Israel. So this is unfathomable for the New York political establishment, the financial establishment in New York, that someone like Zohran Mamdani, who comes from an academic family, whose father was an outspoken opponent of colonialism, who wrote a book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, which actually helped inspire my book, The Management of Savagery, about how the CIA has actually supported jihadism around the world in order to weaken geopolitical American foes. These forbidden truths were passed down to Zohran Mamdani, and now he's being attacked in two separate ways. And I'll explain why, but he's being attacked in two separate ways. One, just simply for being a Muslim immigrant. This is an attack from the National Republicans that Andrew Cuomo is conveying, which I think, is destroying whatever was left of his legacy after all the sexual harassment suits and all the corruption scandals. Andrew Cuomo is now agreeing with right-wing radio hosts that Zohran Mamdani is a jihadist, that he would welcome another 9/11. And they're doing this because they want to make they want to hang the New York City mayoral election around the National Democratic Party's neck like an albatross, and they hope that it will cost them elections in like suburban swing districts in Ohio, in swing states. That's why J.D. Vance is getting involved and mocking Zohran Mamdani for referring to family members' experiences with Islamophobia after 9/11. Has nothing to do with New York. But that, I don't think, will succeed. The Democratic Party is running away from has run away from Zohran Mamdani for that reason, because they're afraid of losing races elsewhere if they embrace him too closely, because he represents a particular trend in New York City. Then you have his enemies in New York, they're trying to swing the polls and set up a battle if he wins between him and the NYPD on a really bizarre basis. Zoran Mamdani, as I said, he understands many of the things that we understand about Israel-Palestine, and he had given several talks before activist groups about the NYPD's training with the Israeli army, which most New Yorkers do not approve of and would not support if they actually knew about it. But the New York City press barely covers this, and it's extremely scandalous. I mean, during the Obama era, the NYPD ran a so-called demographics unit in New York to specifically spy on Muslim New Yorkers, but which also spied on Muslim students as far away as Yale University. I think they spied on students at Rutgers too, outside New York. And according to the Associated Press, this demographics unit was inspired by methods that Israel used in the occupied West Bank. And this is in addition to the NYPD maintaining a liaison office in Kfar Saba, Israel. So they have all kinds of connections to Israel. They're training with the Israeli military, which, as we know, is a bloodstained apartheid occupation army. Nobody in New York wants this. And now all of these clips are coming out as the sort of 11th hour opposition research to attack Zoran Mamdani for drawing these connections. And I don't see how it's going to work because nobody supports these deadly exchanges with Israel. And I think this is actually a blessing because I've been trying to educate the American public for almost 15 years about Israel training police forces, not just in New York City, but in small towns, in college towns across the US, telling them how to shoot criminal suspects as though they were suicide bombers. This is how we start to educate the American public about the toxic special relationship with Israel, and Mamdani's enemies are doing it for us. So I kind of welcome this battle, but at the same time, it's important to understand what they're trying to do. I think Mamdani's enemies understand he's going to lose. He's going to win. And on the day after, they want the NYPD to help lead a coup against him. The NYPD is like a state within a state. It is larger than most foreign militaries, and it has many officials and rank and file officers who are hostile to Mamdani. So they want to pit the NYPD against Mamdani. There's also the likelihood of, we saw this over the past 2 years, staged anti-Semitism incidents. There are going to be so many staged incidents if he wins. And I would be concerned about manufactured terrorist plots like the kind we saw, especially during the Obama era, manufactured by the FBI, in which the FBI created a controlled plot for some mentally disturbed Muslim man and then scared the public into believing that ISIS was operating or Al-Qaeda was operating in our midst when it was entirely the FBI's doing. I think New York will become a theater for these kinds of intrigues as they work to make an example of Mamdani to make sure, number one, his example doesn't spread to other cities, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Chicago. These cities all have the same, very similar political constituencies. And number two, that he's hamstrung, that he can't actually enact an agenda in which he has actually promised to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he comes to New York and end the exchanges with the Israeli army. Already, Zoran Mamdani has conceded and kept on Jessica Tisch, the NYPD commissioner, who is a committed pro-Israel Zionist, who is a political enemy of his. And I think this is because of the fear of a kind of coup attempt from within after he wins.
You know, he was asked on Fox News what he would do if Netanyahu goes to New York and he's the mayor of New York. It's amazing to me that he didn't back down. He said that he's going to, as you've mentioned, he's going to arrest Netanyahu.
Because it's popular. It's increasingly popular on the right, too. I mean, Steve Bannon, former Trump chief of staff, just called for Netanyahu to be removed in a coup attempt. I mean, Netanyahu. Israel is polling in single digits among Democrats in the US. When Democrats are asked in every poll, do you support Israel? Only about 6 or 7% now say yes. So why would Mamdani suddenly take the pro-Israel line?
Is that going to solve the problem the United States has with Israel?
Well, he obviously figures in MAGA, and probably Donald Trump himself loathed Netanyahu. Everyone loathes him. Charlie Kirk loathed him. Everyone who's had to deal with him loathes him. He's manipulative. He's a bully. He's a thug. He gets what he wants from a country that is whose political and financial establishment is largely under his thumb. That's why we're seeing the ceasefire collapse in Gaza, because there's no leverage that Trump can or will exert on Netanyahu or Israel. But of course, it won't solve the problem. The problem is Zionism. The problem is this ethno-supremacist system, which requires a permanent state of war, endless occupation, in order to maintain its settler colonial character. And it cannot consolidate its hold on greater Israel because of the resistance, indigenous resistance, and resistance from this resistance axis that spans from Iran to Yemen. And so it's constantly at war. It's now at war inside the United States, and Laura Loomer is one of its warriors. So that's the issue. It will be at war after Netanyahu, and but removing Netanyahu will weaken Israel significantly. It doesn't really have a figure like Netanyahu who can fill his shoes. He's actually widely hated in Israel, but he has more support than any other Israeli figure. So if someone like Yair Lapid comes in, he'll be a weak prime minister that will rely on a lot of right-wing support. It will basically be kind of like a wide-ranging coalition government, and he'll probably have to trade power with someone like Naftali Bennett, who comes from Likud, who came up under Netanyahu's watch from within the Likud party, who is a major supporter of the settlement enterprise. And Yair Lapid and Netanyahu are completely on the same page when it comes to war on Iran and manipulating the United States into the war. There's literally no difference between Netanyahu and any Israeli opposition figure on the key issues of apartheid, occupation, war with Iran, or deceiving and manipulating the American public. The difference is the tone and the talent level. And no one has the talent or the experience that Netanyahu has had in being able to manage the relationship with the United States, which is actually managing the United States.
Max, what's your take on the annexation of the West Bank? Donald Trump and his administration, he sent J.D. Vance to Israel, then Rubio. They're talking about no annexation of the West Bank to Israel. But Netanyahu came out and in Hebrew, he had an interview. He was asked how does he feel about what Donald Trump is talking about. He said that we are an independent nation, so we're going to decide about our future. How do you see these sort of differences between the two administrations?
Well, J.D. Vance was not the first president or vice president to be humiliated on a visit to Israel, where the Knesset voted to annex the West Bank. I mean, this is a deliberate attempt to humiliate him. And I mean, this happened under Obama. It's happened under previous presidents. And they know that while J.D. Vance struck back rhetorically and said it was weird and crazy of them to do that, that's about all they're going to get. The real state of play could never be more clear, which is that the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public, the Knesset, Israel's so-called Jewish and democratic state, which is Jewish toward Arabs and democratic towards Jews, wants to annex the West Bank and formalize their apartheid system, and then begin ethnically cleansing Palestinians from the West Bank, and to completely remove the Palestinian Vichy Authority based in Ramallah, which in some ways would be welcome, because then we would be dealing with Israel as it truly is in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority's existence prevents the so-called international community from recognizing that Israel maintains an apartheid system in the West Bank. It creates the facade of Palestinian governance, of a de facto Palestinian state, when there's no such thing, and the PA collaborates directly with the Israeli army. Of course, removing the PA will create misery for over 1 million people living in Palestinian cities in Area A. And that's where Israel's going. But the so-called gatekeepers of the Israeli military intelligence establishment know that formalizing apartheid through the annexation of the West Bank is a poison pill and will accelerate Israel's demise on the world stage, especially as the European powers recognize Palestinian statehood. And what they aim to do is what they're currently doing, which is to annex the West Bank without annexing it formally. And that means giving the settlers Polaris all-terrain vehicles to be able to reach any point in the West Bank in the hills, to terrorize shepherds, to kill their flocks, to burn their olive groves, sending the military to escort the settlers, to commit acts of terror. The video that we've seen of elderly Palestinians harvesting their olives throughout the South Hebron Hills or north of Ramallah in the rural areas and being terrorized is copious this week. This is an aim to ethnically cleanse areas B and C, the rural areas and the so-called, mixed areas in the West Bank, and move everyone into Area A, which are walled off cities that are essentially cantons. And so the West Bank is already being annexed, but without formally doing it, to avoid the political price that Israel will pay. I mean, in 2024, under Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, the settlers were essentially deputized and given Israeli army uniforms and M4 rifles to go terrorize Palestinian farmers and rural communities. And now we're seeing an escalation. The West Bank is at war. I mean, it's a war on all Palestinians in the West Bank, and you get almost no coverage from Western media of this war.
Tom Barak, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, said to the government in Lebanon, the final warning, the last warning on his part, that if they're not going to disarm Hezbollah, Israel would do it with force.
Yeah.
Last time I've seen Israel fighting Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, that wasn't the case. And how was that changed? The situation has changed since then.
Well, Israel's waging a war between wars. It's enacting its so-called mowing the lawn strategy in southern Lebanon. It's even attacking concrete factories and any infrastructure that could be used for rebuilding. It wants to keep the population in a state of fear and misery. But it has not degraded Hezbollah's ability, like through its Radwan forces, to hold their own face to face with Israeli infantry or Israeli tanks. There's no evidence of that. What Israel managed to do in 2024 was to degrade Hezbollah's missile capacity, but Hezbollah was still able to hit Israeli cities. And for example, the Binyamina operation hit Israeli military bases with drones and exact serious casualties. So Israel at this point is, the Israeli society is somewhat exhausted from the 2-year genocide. Just as far as Gaza is concerned, I don't think they want a northern front. The residents of the north in Israel are just coming back. And these appear to be empty threats from Tom Barak, who is threatening to use Israel as an American. It's as an American diplomat, he's threatening a population with a country that he supposedly doesn't govern, which really reveals his true role. And I don't think Hezbollah is intimidated, especially as a new generation rises to the fore within its ranks. Who is intimidated is the puppet government of Lebanon in Beirut they're not going to be able to go disarm Hezbollah themselves. Look at what happened the last time when Rafiq Hariri and his Future Party attempted to do it. They were wasted in the streets. So we're going to see this play out over time with Israel continuing to enact its mowing the lawn strategy. And that's what it's doing in Gaza. And it has said, I mean, the Israeli chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, has said Israel aims to get to that point with Iran, where they can continuously bomb Iran anytime Iran seeks to rebuild its ballistic missile capacity or recover its nuclear stockpile. And it's never going to, I highly doubt it will be able to get to that point with a powerful country like Iran, but that's their objective. So we're just kind of in a state of continuous warfare until a US administration puts its foot down and stops playing this game, and recognizes that Hezbollah is actually a real part of Lebanese society, that Hamas is a real part of Palestinian society, that commands a real constituency, and you can't keep slaughtering and terrorizing civilians with this fantasy of eradicating them.
Is he learning something new from Europeans?
Well, yeah, this is definitely a model that's already being employed in Europe and in the UK, where you're seeing people being arrested, an NHS doctor being arrested for a speech she gave opposing Israel's genocide. My colleague, Kit Clarenberg, being detained by counter-terror police for his journalism. He wouldn't be the only one who this happened to. It's sort of it's a way of eroding the First Amendment and employing the European model in order for the government to determine what the facts are and to at least shadow ban online influencers and journalists who aren't advancing what they consider to be the consensus. The Obama Foundation, since it was formed, has been raking in money from billionaire foundations who want to regulate speech in order to advance their own agenda. And you could call it a liberal agenda, but it represents a particular and peculiar form of liberalism that's illiberal, in which an intelligentsia, self-appointed intelligentsia of neoliberals, sort of transatlanticist-minded neoliberals who are pro-war and committed to American hegemony, get to determine what reality is. Their ideology is reality. And that we saw what they did during the COVID event, where they determined that there was going to be a response to a pandemic that they declared, in which everyone would be forced to take a vaccine under penalty of losing their jobs, not being able to enter restaurants and public places, that 3-year-olds would be masked. And when the scientific data didn't match up, for example, and new waves of COVID continued to infect the public, they simply banned everyone from Twitter X because they controlled Twitter X. They simply banned everyone from Facebook. The Biden administration has been exposed for calling in to the social media executives which accounts to ban on the basis of challenging the so-called science, which is code for the consensus. And at the gray zone, we have faced censorship, suppression, gotten strikes on YouTube for challenging the consensus on foreign policy, in which I don't think most Americans agree with the consensus, but we're challenging the experts. So when Obama says facts, he means billionaire-backed, transatlantic, pro-war experts artificially manufacturing a consensus. And that when he says we have to respect the First Amendment, but the government has to regulate these voices, then there's going to be government implemented hate speech policies. The government controls the algorithm, and those voices will be able to speak, but no one will be able to hear them. So they can't complain about having their First Amendment rights violated. And after all, we're all speaking in private corporate domains. Me and you right now, we're speaking on YouTube, which is controlled by Google, which is a weapons contractor, which has many of these speech policies. Our videos are heavily suppressed at the gray zone. And Obama's just talking about formalizing that as government policy. And why does he want to do it? Obama is the most effective, although you can see in that event, he's not very articulate or compelling when he's not standing before dual teleprompters, but he is the most well-respected voice of the transatlantic establishment today. He's avoided a lot of the scandals that his other colleagues have gotten bogged down in. And what he's calling for is imposing a new system to basically prevent the right from gaining power again. What Elon Musk did with Twitter X is the greatest nightmare of those who want to impose another system of control. But we also have to acknowledge that if you've been participating in X under Elon Musk, I think Elon has advanced an even more sophisticated mechanism of control behind the guise of free speech. And the algorithm has been apparent. It's clearly been changed in the last week or two to amplify Zionist voices and suppress those like ours. So as long as we're prisoners of these billionaire-owned social media platforms, there's always going to be censorship. It's never going to be transparent. But what Obama is calling for is more naked government control of the censorship mechanism.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Max. Great pleasure, as always, having you on.